We're continuing to monitor breaking news at this hour. On MSNBC, the president expected to speak from the White House in a matter of minutes. Actually could happen any second. His topic will be unemployment benefits. We'll bring you those as they happen. Of course, they follow the vote in the Senate just minutes ago, advancing the bill to extend long-term unemployment for more than 3 months. Now, the measure needed 60 votes and got them. 6 Republicans voted for it, including GOP co-sponsor Senator Dean Heller of Nevada. Those are the 6 right there. I'll just tick through their names quickly. And I also want to get you something from the House of Representatives. Told you Dean Heller, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire, Dan Coates of Indiana, and Rob Portman of Ohio. Now, the House, this courtesy off camera from Luke Russert down in D.C. This is John Boehner, the Speaker of the House. He said many things off camera, but I will read to you one part of it. He said, 1 month ago, I personally told the White House that another extension of temporary emergency unemployment benefits should not only be paid for, but include something to help put people back to work. To date, the president has offered no such plan. If he does, I'll be happy to discuss it. But right now, the House is going to remain focused on growing the economy and giving America's unemployed the independence that only comes from finding a good job. So clearly, there will be a fight in the House of Representatives. Let's talk about this a little bit. We wait for the president. Let's bring in our agenda panel for today. Kelly Goff, columnist for the Daily Beast and The Root. Lee Fong, contributing writer for The Nation. And Shira Center is politics editor for the Capitol Hill newspaper Roll Call. Shira, I'll start with you. You were going to sort of pay attention to the Republicans voting here, and we saw 6 voted for it. What did you think of what you saw in terms of the unemployment rates of the states of the senators who voted for and against this?
Right, so it was a pretty unpredictable group of senators, 6 Republican senators who voted to cut off debate and essentially move forward with this bill. I was looking at a lot of the senators from very poor states with high unemployment rates that Democrats were targeting in the lead up to this vote. For example, Thad Cochran and Roger Wicker from Mississippi, which is one of the poorest states in the nation, right. Or Tennessee, Bob Corker, which is has a very high unemployment rate. Instead, you kind of had quite a mix here. I mean, there are 2 senators from states, 3 senators from states in that group from high unemployment rates. Dean Heller, obviously the co-sponsor. Nevada has 9% unemployment rate, very high above the national average. You also have Senator Portman from Ohio and Senator Dan Coates, who's pretty typically a hardline Republican, pretty typically votes with his party, also has an above average unemployment rate. Yeah. So pretty unpredictable, interesting group. Yeah, Coates was the biggest surprise for a lot of insiders. Kelly, I want to turn it to you. You just heard what I said from the Speaker Boehner. So what chances, if any, does this have in the House?
Well, look, I think this puts Republicans actually in a short-term versus long-term electoral quandary. In the short term, it's really good. This is a great issue to gin up their Tea Party base, who obviously hates this extension, right? But in the long term, when you start looking at the numbers, we have something really interesting happening in this country that Peter Beinart, my colleague at the Daily Beast, wrote a really interesting piece about, which is historically you have basically blue-collar and working-class voters, and you have white-collar and educated voters, and their interests are pretty different in terms of at the voting booth. Millennials are the first generation where you have extremely educated white-collar people who are struggling like working-class people. And so for them, this is the type of issue that in terms of the long-term electorally, this is an issue that could actually really hurt Republicans, because you have very educated people who aren't voting thinking that, tax breaks are a great thing for them. They're worried about health care and actually having unemployment benefits when they're
it's a great point. I hadn't really heard it framed that way. Lee, I want to play what Republican Senator Dean Heller, one of the co-sponsors of the Senate bill, had to say this morning on MSNBC to Republican colleagues in the House.
What I would encourage are some of my colleagues to get outside the Beltway, go home and talk to some of these people that need this unemployment insurance. And keep in mind, these are people that are actively looking for a job. These are hardworking Americans that need this help, and they are looking for a job. Let's make sure they can stay in their homes. Let's make sure that they can put food on the table for their children.
Between that and what Kelly just said, Lee, how do Republicans resist that argument?
Well, Dean Heller makes a great point there. Republicans need to talk to the unemployed to make this vote happen. Part of the reason that we're having such a difficulty in passing this extension is that the unemployed have a very small voice in Washington. They don't have any fancy lobbyists. They don't have a super PAC. The last time there is some difficulty in passing an unemployment benefits extension was in 2011 after Republicans took the House. And in that year, the U.S. Conference of Bishops, the largest Catholic advocacy groups, they were out very visible in visibly pressuring Republicans to vote for this law. This time around, the bishops seem more concerned with social issues. They've been actively campaigning on birth control and Obamacare, on the recent gay marriage decisions in Utah and New Mexico. They've been a little bit more silent here. And if you're unemployed in America, there are very few advocates on your behalf. So that's a big part of the dynamic on Capitol Hill right now.
You know, there's a lot of mention of this empathy gap. And when Mitt Romney didn't do a lot of favors to Republicans who try to say they're advocates for the working class of this country. Shira, I'll put it to you. You know, we have Paul Ryan trying to shape his message, Marco Rubio to shape his message coming up in terms of how they're going to try to lure these voters. How are they going to do it, and how can they do it in a way that would be successful?
Right. I think that's a huge question that the Republican Party is facing right now. I mean, President Obama's campaign team in many ways were ahead of their time with leading with the income inequality gap as one of the huge tenets of their campaign in 2012. And we're seeing that continue to play out right now. The Republican Party is dealing with that. I think it's interesting to see senators like Marco Rubio go on sort of an anti-poverty tour in many ways, trying to put forth some new ideas, focusing on words like enterprise and economic opportunity, and taking that angle to convince mostly younger and let's say middle-class voters most likely to come on board with the GOP.
Well, you know, Kelly, I'll put it to you. I mean, the one thing that Boehner says that makes logical sense, I'll probably get vilified on Twitter for saying this, but I'm going to say it, is that education is important. Giving this group, I know we had the gentleman on, Mr. Fugazi, who said, you know, listen, these are educated people, but they might not be educated in the specific area they can get a job. I mean, is that an area where the Republicans could get any traction, or is it just one piece of a big puzzle that's broken?
Well, here's the thing, though. Again, an empathy gap probably doesn't matter all that much for a midterm election, right? Because the people, there's lower turnout, and the people who turn out tend to be, you know, the most devoted voters. And so those may not be people who actually care about things like an empathy gap. But when you're talking about expanding your tent for the long term, an empathy gap matters a lot. And what we have happening is we have a lot of people who are being told to get more education. The class of 2012 is graduating with the highest student loan debt of any class in history. Something I've written about a lot at The Root is the issue, particularly among African Americans, and how dismal the employment situation there is. So it is not possible 20 years from now to be a candidate who says, I don't care about the poor, I don't really care about minorities, that's not really my problem, I kind of care about people who can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and who aren't diverse. That's not a long-term winning strategy, and I think that that's what the party's really grappling with this movement.
That doesn't win elections. Very quickly, guys, we're very tight on time, but I want to just ask you how this is going to play out, this 3-month extension in Congress, and then the impact on the 2014 elections. I'll say 20 seconds. Kelly, you want to go first?
How it plays on the 2012 elections?
How is this going to end up, this particular vote in the House with the 3-month extension? What's the end result going to be? And then what do you think is the impact on 2014 midterms?
Gives Tea Party momentum, helps the Republicans in some ways, hurts them in the long term in the presidential down the road.
All right, Lee?
I think it helps Democrats because this conversation about economic inequality, Democrats have put the most substantive policies on the table, and if that's the conversation, it helps Democrats.
Shira?
It's probably more politically advantageous to Democrats, but I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think voters are going to be litigating this on the airwaves, or politicians are going to be talking about this particular vote come November. If anything, it just feeds into a larger message Democrats could put forward if they're lucky.
All right, Kelly Goff with The Root and the Daily Beast, The Nation's Lee Fong, and Roll Call Shira Center. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.